I am going to hide myself, y'all, because I'm a real excited talker and I distract myself. I don't want to distract you either. So thank you for being here. I love gardening. I love herbs. I had my first in-ground garden when I was 16 and I'm 66 now. So I have truly been growing something, whether in the ground in raised beds or pots, for a long, long time. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to get right into it, hopefully, if we advance. Here we go. Oh, and for some reason, the screen is not advancing. And if one of you Master Gardeners has an option for me, I'm not sure why we're not. There we go. All right. Okay. This production, our presentation is supported by our regional water supplier, Tarrant Regional Water District. TRWD maintains 4 area lakes and pipelines needed to provide surface water to local water treatment plants so they can clean it to meet drinking water standards for our communities. They also work with many cities in Tarrant County, such as Fort Worth, Arlington, Mansfield, many others, to provide water conservation programs in the community. As you know, conservation is an important water supply strategy. At SaveTarrantWater.com, you can do a lot of things. You can sign up for a free sprinkler check for Tarrant County residents, where a professional licensed technician will come out and assess your sprinkler system and provide advice at no cost. You can sign up for free weekly watering advice custom to your location. The email I got on Monday said I needed to water 0.25 inches of that much water on my grass this week. There's a calendar of events and classes that you can access and register for. And they also have water saving tips and videos. TRWD partners with organizations like Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Tarrant County Master Gardeners to provide educational programs like this one. So be sure to check out their website and sign up for free services. So what is an herb? This is an official definition. I'm trying to move the little box of it. The official definition from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. And it tells you that an herb is a seed-producing annual, biennial, or perennial that does not develop persistent woody tissue but dies down at the end of the growing season. It's a plant or plant part valued for its medicinal, savory, or aromatic properties. Sidebar though, I have many herbs, and you're probably shaking your head too and thinking, wait a minute, rosemary develops woody tissue. Even my basil, some of it had to be cut with a handsaw because it was so woody. So this is the official definition, but there's always room for discussion. And there's more to herbs than just that definition. The word herb derives from the term herbaceous, and that just means it's a plant with leaves and stems is herbaceous. And one of my favorite things to try to trick people with is this statement that herbs are a subset of vegetables. Some vegetables are herbs, but all herbs are vegetables. And if you think for a minute, can you think of a vegetable that is also an herb? Peppers. Peppers is the one I use. We eat peppers of all types. We save the seeds from red pepper. We put red pepper, chili flake in our dishes. We use cayenne pepper, which is ground pepper, to season our foods. So think about that. A tomato is a vegetable, but it's not an herb. So just have that in your mind for context. Herbs are closely related to spices, seeds, roots, fruit, bark that's usually crushed, ground, or dried. So herbs have been cultivated for many, many thousands of years. And the reason for that is that they just have so many purposes. Medicinal, aromatic, savory, or culinary uses. Most herbs are actually really easy to grow. Many make just tremendous companion plants in your garden, which means they benefit their neighbors. Most herbs will attract pollinators if allowed to flower, bolt, which means going to flower. And then some herbs trap pest predators. And we'll talk about all these wonderful characteristics as we go through the presentation. These are herbs I've grown in Fort Worth, and we've been here. This is my going into our 7th year. And I started gardening. We moved here in 2018. I started gardening in 2019, and the very first thing I planted were 2 small herb beds. And I have expanded greatly what I grow. And if you look, this is a list of 36 herbs. It's not everything I've grown, but these are the ones that I try to grow every year. And the only ones that I would say are finicky, lavender and excuse me, rosemary are hard for me to germinate from seed. I can get them to germinate, but they tend to die off. So I now buy transplants. Tarragon, I can get it to grow, I can get it to sprout, but it just does not like our heat. So instead, I grow Mexican mint marigold, which is a great substitute in cooking. And this is my first year to grow Rosa canina, which is known as dog rose. And I'm strictly growing it for the extra large rose hips that it will produce in the fall. So this is a picture of our backyard last year, and we spend a lot of time out there. Especially we like to sit on our patio, and mosquitoes seem to love me. So all of the pots and planters that are surrounding the patio have got herbs in them. And they're normally herbs that have very pungent or strong odors, such as, or aromas, aroma is a better word, such as lemongrass, lemon balm, lemon thyme, parsley, lavender, German thyme, garlic and onion chives. And I stick chives in with pretty flowers because again, you brush up against them and many of the pesky insects don't like those smells. Let's see, oregano, catmint. I don't grow catnip on the patio because the cats eat it, but catmint is in a hanging basket. And I'll grow them in hanging baskets with micro tomatoes too. But all those herbs are there so that I can reach out and brush up against them and then rub some of the essential oils, especially from the lemon scented herbs, on my skin. And then as you move further into the backyard, there's a new dedicated herb bed there. And at the very back, my vegetable garden's behind the picket fence, but that pink looking shrub-like thing in the very back in front of the picket fence is coneflowers. So herbs are in every single bed in my front and backyard. So we're going to go through specific herbs next. It won't be everything that was on my list because we don't have that much time. Basil is just a wonderful herb, as many of you know. It is a great companion plant. It is something that you plant it with any other vegetable or flower crops, and it gets along with them. It doesn't hurt them. It doesn't harm them at all. There are many different kinds of basil. It's estimated there are between 50 and 150 different varieties. There are a lot of hybrids. At the top of the screen is sweet basil, pretty standard. Use it in pesto all the time. I will say that I've had people tell me you shouldn't harvest it if it's gone to flower, but I do. It doesn't get bitter like so many other plants that bolt. The bottom basil is a cardinal basil, and you'll notice the leaves have a pretty burgundy edging to them. And then one day you go out and you see it starting to form this really pretty cluster of burgundy leaves, and then you'll get little flowers coming out on the top of it. It's edible, but it's not, to me, as pleasant to eat as Genovese or sweet basil. Bee balm is a wonderful plant. It's an herb, and it's often used in teas, but pollinators love it. And one of my big goals, besides planting herbs everywhere, is to bring pollinators into all the garden. In the top picture, the red flowers at the back by the picket fence are our native Jacob Klein bee balm, and they easily grow over 4 feet tall and just have the most delightful flowers that just sort of wave in the breeze. The pinky purple one is our wild bee balm, and it grows over 6 feet tall in the garden. And the bumblebees cannot get enough of it, and they're so heavy on it that they'll kind of make the flower stalks tilt. Borage is an herb that a lot of people tell me they've never heard of before, but it's a great herb. It has several different properties and benefits. When it starts out, it's a very small plant and has lots and lots of pretty little purple flowers on it. You might be able to see some spent flower petals over on the left-hand side of the screen on one of the big leaves. So it grows in a rosette kind of pattern. It starts out, and as the leaves get bigger and fall down, it just keeps growing. And the scientists say that they have counted 999 flowers on this plant. And the little pollinators absolutely adore it. It will bloom early in the season. It self-seeds. It This is a baby from your mother plant that was in a bed 6 feet away from it. So it will self-seed all over the garden. It doesn't bother me. I grow it with my tomatoes because it's said to improve the flavor of your tomatoes. I don't know if that's true, but my tomatoes taste good, so I like to think that it does benefit. When the leaves are tiny, they're edible. When they get big like this, they're very hairy and coarse. And the leaves and the flowers also have a cucumber flavor, and people do tend to drop the flowers in clear cocktails like gin and tonic, and they're just pretty to look at. Calendula, some people call it calendula, but calendula is the official pronunciation. There are at least 15 species of it. It comes in many color variations. There's a pink calendula. There are variegated ones. There's orange. I love this gold one just because it's so cheerful. Its other name is pot marigold. It will self-seed too. Pollinators love it. But it's a great, it has kind of a mounding formation, the greenery, and then these little stalks just come up and they greet you in the garden, and they're cheerful. And the petals are also edible. They're slightly bitter, but you can throw them in a salad. And if you're buying any kind of organic skin creams or lotions these days, you'll often find calendula or essential oil of calendula as one of the ingredients. Chamomile. I know most of you have probably heard of or tried chamomile tea. A lot of people drink it at night. It's said to help you relax. Beautiful little flowers, very easy to harvest. You just simply place your hand with your fingers open underneath the flowers and pull up gently, and the flowers pop off in your palm. And then you can take them in and dry them out and then put them in an infuser and make tea. I discovered, unfortunately, last year that I'm allergic to it because I've been drinking chamomile tea for several years, drank some, woke up with swollen eyelids, tried it again to make sure. Yep. So I don't drink it anymore, but I grow it for the pollinators and just because it makes me happy. And that's a good benefit of gardening, isn't it? So these are chives. Garlic chives are on the left, onion chives are on the right. Garlic chives bloom in the fall or late summer, and the pollinators just go crazy. If you've ever been to the Master Gardener demonstration garden, the herb garden is what you walk into first, and the hum is so loud you can hear the insects before you even get in there. They're just thrilled to have these flowers. I personally prefer the taste of onion chives, and that's the plant on the right. They have beautiful little pinkish purple blossoms in the spring, and mine are all the flower pods are they're getting ready to bloom right now. The lovely thing is the onion chive blossoms are edible, and they're great. You cut them off and just throw them again into a salad, and it's a real burst of mild onion flavor. And again, it dresses up your salad, and your children might say, "What on earth is in there?" Leads to a good discussion. This is comfrey, and comfrey is interesting. People used to take it internally, but it has really high alkaloid toxin levels in it, so people are always advised never to ingest it. You'll see the pretty little purple flowers, and bumblebees and small native bees will go up in them, and you'll see their little rear ends kind of hanging out. The flowers grow upside down, and it's another one that will bloom pretty early. It's a cousin of borage, so it has rough, hairy leaves also. Never try these because they're just unhealthy. But I grow comfrey for 2 reasons or 3 reasons. I grow it for the pollinators. I grow it because it has an enormous taproot. I've been told that the taproots can grow over 3 feet long. And this is one of the few plants in the garden that I grow actually in native soil. I grow almost everything either in raised beds or planters because our soil is, somewhat difficult to grow in unless you amend it heavily. And so that taproot is really helping to break up the structure of the soil. But the other reason I grow it is because it makes a great um, compost tea, if you will. You just throw spent leaves or leaves that you've trimmed into a 5-gallon bucket, add some water to it, and leave it for at least a month. It is one of the smelliest things you've ever smelled. It smells worse than fish emulsion, and it's extremely concentrated, so you'll dilute it into a gallon sprayer. I don't put more than a fourth a cup ever, and I feed my plant roots with it. So it's like nature's feeding nature. So that's one of the things I really like about it. Oops. Dill. So dill is lovely. Dill is lovely with so many different in preparations in the house, culinary. Again, it's a great attractant for pollinators once it bolts and goes to flower. It's a host plant for the swallowtail butterfly caterpillar, and I grow it all over my yard, front yard, backyard, pots everywhere again, because my grandmother always told me, grow some for you and some for them, and them was the pollinators. And so um, if you look closely at the picture on the bottom, you can see a fly is on the plant, and there's also a teeny tiny little insect of some sort towards the back of that cluster of flowers. I'm trying to remember. There are 15 varieties, so I didn't know that. I've just grown, I think, 3 different ones, but dill is easy to germinate, and it's a happy plant. I've been asked about, I was asking a presentation earlier today if dill doesn't like our weather, and dill is like a lot of different plants. Once it gets really hot, it's not as happy, so it will go to flower early. But the way you deal with that, and with cilantro too, that would be another one, is that you plant dill today. In 2 weeks, you plant more dill. In 2 weeks, you plant more dill in your succession planting. So you've got a good supply. My other advice is to grow some in the shade, and it will also last longer. Echinacea or coneflower, a delightful plant to grow. Our native purple coneflower, to me, is always really a pink of some sort, but it's such a reliable plant. It comes back every year. I feed it once a year with worm castings or with fish emulsion, and that's all I really do for it. If you cut it back in after the first blooms, it will rebloom. There are over 9 species of coneflower. Aside from our native, there are many, many cultivars, like the white one on the left. Uh, it, it I'm always surprised that people tell me they've never smelled coneflowers. They smell absolutely heavenly, which explains why you can go out one day and have the blossom just absolutely covered in honeybees, because if I could smell something that wonderful all the time, I'd carry them around with me. So it's a great plant. Medicinally, people have used it for many, many years. And I do want to say about medicinal use, I am not advocating anything. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a healthcare practitioner. I have just read and researched, and I know that people have used all parts of the coneflower for different purposes over the years. Garlic. I bet most of you cook with garlic on a regular basis. If you don't grow garlic, you're missing out, because it is probably one of the easiest things to grow here and any place I've lived. And I've lived in Arkansas and the Gulf Coast area and South Texas and Central Texas. You buy organic cloves of garlic, excuse me, organic bulbs of garlic, separate the cloves, leave the paper husk on them, plant them with the flat side, the basal plate down. That's where the roots come from, and the points going up. You plant them in an amended bed that has a lot of good compost in it. You can bury them 4 to 6 inches deep. I bury mine at least 4 inches deep, and I heavily mulch them. And that's it. They are planted in October at my house and they're harvested in June, by when all the green leaves start dying off. And the next process is to cure them. You don't want to cure them in your garage because our garages get too humid. So we actually cure ours in a back room that gets great ventilation with a ceiling fan and the air conditioner, and they don't smell after a few days. And then when the stems are totally dry and brittle, you cut them off and you can store them in mesh bags. I hang mine all year long. They're hanging in the laundry room. And we're still eating on garlic now that we harvested last June. So that's a pretty good return for your efforts. Oh, one thing, sorry, if you want to buy garlic at the grocery store, be sure to do this. Be sure that you buy organic garlic, because if it's not organic, it's very likely that it's been treated with a growth inhibitor. So even keep that in mind if you're going to eat garlic that you buy from the grocery store. Try to get organic. Lavender. Most people I know love lavender. I do. I grow two different varieties. The one at the top is on the right side is French lavender, and it has the most beautiful frilly papery blossoms with a really long, tall stems, not stems. I'll think of it in a minute. Of course, it'll be in the next slide. But um, they're gorgeous. But I only grow that as an annual here because the French lavender does not seem to like our winters. However, the English lavender on the bottom overwinters beautifully here. I grow a variety called Hidcote, and then I grow Munstead. And they're both available at a lot of our local nurseries. And that is a plant, again, I have a hard time getting it to germinate from seeds, so I do buy transplants of it. And this winter, we got down 10 degrees was the coldest we got. I grow it in planters and pots on the front porch where it gets morning sun. It's a concrete porch and the house is made of brick. So in the wintertime, I just pull the planters and pots back up against the house. I did not cover my lavender out front at all, even when we got as cold as 10 degrees. And it's growing out there and it's got some flower pods. So great plant. It has, as you know, it's used in perfumes. It's said to be calming and have some antibacterial, antifungal properties. And you'll find I've got some lavender scented hand sanitizer, lavender scented soap, lavender scented shampoo. So it's used in a lot of different products. Marigolds are just a delightful little plant. My grandmother, I remember her telling me, "Oh, you have to plant marigolds with your tomatoes." And it turns out she was right, and she learned that from her mother and grandmother. There's now scientific proof as to why that's something we should do. The roots in a marigold contain a toxin that will kill microscopic root knot nematodes. There are many kinds of nematodes. There are good nematodes in the soil and there are bad nematodes. And the bad nematodes will infiltrate the roots of a tomato, pepper, okra, sometimes cucumber plant, and they basically kind of build up in the roots and make these hideous looking gnarly knots. And then that slows down the plant's ability to get nutrients out of the soil. So when you dig up those plants at the end of the season, you're going to look at the roots and think, oh my goodness, what happened? For that reason, I never leave tomatoes, peppers, and okra in the ground anymore. I remove them because I want to make sure I didn't have root knot nematodes because I've had an infestation in the past. But I also now plant a marigold plant with every single tomato. So if I plant 10 tomatoes, I plant 10 marigolds. And there's so many varieties. I can't grow enough, so I end up buying flats from my local nursery. The cool looking one on the right is a variety called Old Flame that I ordered the seeds from Baker Creek Seed Company. I have a list at the end of the presentation as to where I buy my seeds. Lemon balm is another great plant. I believe I said at the beginning that this is one I definitely grow on the patio where we sit, but I grow it out in the garden too, just in a dedicated bed. It's in the mint family. It has a square stem, so it will spread really well, but it makes an incredible tea. It's just real vibrant and bright. And anytime I give the plant a haircut, I bring the stems in, wash them, dry them, dehydrate them, and then grind them up. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's also said to have just calming properties, and it's also great to add the dried leaves into potpourri if you make homemade potpourri, which I do. Oregano is an herb that is used in so many different cuisines, and there's so many varieties. Mexican oregano, Greek oregano, Italian oregano. There's even a Cuban oregano that's got a texture more like succulents, but I believe this is Greek oregano that I was growing. This was last year, and I needed a haircut. It was enormous. So I went ahead and brought it in and cleaned it and then dried it and ground it, and it's stored in my pantry. Ah, so sorry that my mouse is, I'm going to see if I can make it go back. Apologies for that. There we go. Okay, now we're moving forward. So nasturtiums. Nasturtiums are edible. The leaves are edible. The flowers are edible. They have a very peppery taste. They're great in salads. They also, I have no idea how many varieties or colors there are now, but you can buy dwarf nasturtiums, so they don't spread as much and the flowers are a little smaller. But nasturtiums also can be used as a trap crop. And so what that means is you can plant them away from treasured crops. And nasturtiums are very attractive to flea beetles. And those are the really tiny insects that make holes in all the leaves of, say, your sweet potato plants, the vines. And they're also attractive to aphids. So if you want to have a lure for aphids and flea beetles, you might plant nasturtiums in this was a movable planter that I had it in this picture, and have it far away from, say, sweet potato plants or from mustard plants. And flea beetles love to attack your mustard also. Parsley. I happen to like the taste of parsley. I know some people don't care for it, but it's just a nice green taste. And parsley is one of our herbs that's a biennial. So with any biennial, the first year you plant it, it spends all of its energy producing greenery, vegetation. You're going to harvest it like crazy that first year. It will overwinter. And when it overwinters, it just kind of sits there, doesn't do much. But suddenly, when we get a burst of really warm days like today, we hit 92 here at my house. That's telling the parsley it's time to bolt. It is time to go into seed production, and that's its whole job. Its second season, its second year. So it's going to send up really thick stalks that can get honestly as big as celery, and then you're going to have these gorgeous little fluffy white flowers at the top that are going to pull in so many insects, such as the parasitoid wasp. Now, not the parasitic wasp, but the parasitoid wasp. And the parasitoid wasp is one we want in our garden because it's the little tiny guy that comes in for the small flowers, and then it goes around and seeks out tomato hornworm caterpillars, and it will lay eggs on the back of the tomato hornworm caterpillars, and then the eggs will infiltrate the caterpillar, and that, not the eggs, excuse me, the larva will infiltrate the caterpillar when they hatch, and then they will devour that tomato hornworm caterpillar. So it's one less caterpillar turning into a moth to lay more eggs to have more tomato hornworm caterpillars. So it's kind of like nature taking care of nature again. Rosemary, Shakespeare has that famous quote, rosemary for remembrance. And there's actually a lot of research. If you were to look online, there's a lot of research on what's being done testing rosemary's impact on memory with both students and the elderly. And there are results from many studies now showing a potential retention of new learning in both of those groups, the young and the old. So in Fort Worth, if you're going to grow rosemary, I advise buying starts unless you have just phenomenal luck getting it to grow from seed. But we're advised here to grow a variety called Hardy, Hardy, or ARP, ARP. It's the same thing, but it's labeled differently depending upon which nursery it comes from. And it is one that can withstand our cold temperatures. I did not cover my rosemary when we got down to 10 degrees. And one of them got frostbitten on top, and I've just cut that off. And so far, the others look good. I mean, time will tell, but I just get so busy that sometimes it's if you can't survive, sweet baby, I'm going to let you go. But rosemary in cooking, can you imagine Italian food or focaccia or anything like that without rosemary on it? It, I can't. Sage. Sage is a great plant. I love it. When I walk by and pull a leaf off and crush it, I immediately think of Thanksgiving and my grandmother's kitchen and my mother's kitchen. Sage was just, such an integral part of our dressing, our cornbread dressing every Thanksgiving. The variety at the top with the garden art eyes is just common culinary sage, the standard green. The variety at the bottom is variegated, and it's the same plant, just a hybrid cultivar, but it will often, if it doesn't get enough sunlight, it will often revert back to being solid green. But both of these plants have been going strong. The one at the top is 4 years old. This one at the bottom is 2 years old. They're testing sage's impact on oral health right now and other health issues. So again, ongoing work, looking into other things that these plants can do for us. Sunflower is considered an herb. It meets the definitions. It's herbaceous, obviously. It has many different properties. As you know, we can eat the seeds, but did you know you can roast the whole seed head? If once the plant has finished flowering, you can remove what's left of the petals, remove the pollen and everything on top till you just see the seed heads, and wash it well, let it dry, and then you can coat it with olive oil, salt, pepper, garlic powder, and you roast it at high heat, just like you would do a lot of other vegetables. Some people advise wrapping it in foil so it doesn't burn. But when you take it out of the oven, you can cut it with a serrated bread knife and you can just literally eat through. The seed coats are not hard like they are normally, where you have to, bite into them and spit them out. So it's a unique taste, but it's good. And I happen to love sun butter that's made from sunflower seeds, and it's a great substitute for people who can't eat peanuts. The petals are edible. They're very bitter though. They're not my favorite, but they bring in pollinators. And sunflowers are a great trap crop. So I don't plant them in my flower beds. In fact, I don't plant them anymore because when I first started gardening for 2 years, I planted sunflowers, and then I got so many different high cross pollinated varieties that I get some that are orange and some that are yellow and some with circles of yellow and some with circles of red. And I pull up, I promise you, over 1,000 seedlings every year. They come up in the grass. They come up in every bed. It's kind of like when our elm seedlings go crazy and you're constantly pulling up elm seedlings. I'm doing elms and sunflower seedlings at the same time. But it's a trap crop for stink bugs, Florida leaf-footed bugs, and aphids. So the reason you don't want to plant them, obviously, in the bed next to your tomatoes, let's say, is because you want those leaf-footed bugs and stink bugs and aphids to go far away from your tomatoes. But also, the roots of the sunflower also put out a toxin that inhibits growth of anything around them. The sunflower, just like the black walnut and to a degree the live oak, are in a group of plants that are allelopathic, in just meaning that they really don't want close neighbors. They really want to be on an island all by themselves. And so I plant them several feet away. Not plant them. I transplant them several feet away from my favorite crops and let them grow. And these all get anywhere from 8 to 11 feet tall. And that's why I have seedlings all over the yard, because the birds scatter them. But sunflowers are just great. They have deep tap roots if you're growing them in your yard, again, which might improve soil structure. So thyme, German thyme, lemon thyme, common thyme, there are many different. The thyme is an interesting plant for me. This is our front yard, and that is a cluster of thyme growing out over the sidewalk. I didn't plant it. I had a pot with a coneflower in it next to a bed of thyme up in the garden, and I moved that pot to the front yard and planted that coneflower in that spot. And I had this little thyme plant growing. Well, the coneflower didn't make it because the thyme was a bully and crowded it out. So every year I'm just let it grow and I, it'll bloom and get little pollinators and I just cut it back about twice a year so that we can walk across the sidewalk. But that's one patch I don't harvest from for culinary purposes because, stray cats and things walk around out there. But thyme is just a great plant. I use it fresh, I use it dried, and essential oil of thyme has been used medicinally for many different purposes. I think thyme just makes a pretty ground cover in beds, and I've been experimenting with a thyme called Elfin, Elfin thyme, the little bitty thyme. It spreads pretty slowly, but it's really, really thick, and so I've been planting it in a big herb bed just to use sort of as a filler instead of adding mulch. And so far, so good. Yarrow. Yarrow is probably one of my favorite of all herbs, and I don't eat it because it's bitter, bitter, bitter. I have a lot of the white common thyme and it's our native thyme down at the bottom of the picture, but I also love the cultivars. The previous picture with the thyme had yellow or golden yarrow. This pink variety is actually called grapefruit. But I love the red paprika. They all have uh, an allure, well, excuse me, they do. They lure in little bitty uh, pollinators too, like so many of the other plants. And one of the benefits of yarrow is as the leaves on the bottom die and you remove them, you can throw them in your compost bins because yarrow, like stinging nettle, will speed up decomposition in your compost pile. So I love it when you get more than one benefit in the garden from your plants. Yarrow has been used since the first century for blood clotting, based on anecdotal record, and now there's scientific records. So again, remember, I'm not advising you do use it for any purpose, but I just think it's fascinating that it has so many different uses. All right, let's talk culinary. So if I could see you raise your hands, I bet most of you would raise your hands and say you like cooking with thyme or excuse me, with herbs, or you wish you could cook with herbs. This is my favorite. It's a herb chicken salad recipe that actually came out of Mother Earth News in 2015. And I can make sure you get a link to that recipe if you're interested. It's got rosemary and parsley in it, and it's just delicious on a sandwich with radish sprouts and different things. But so I use herbs as much as I can when I'm not too busy to cook, which right now I'm too busy to cook. So, um, drying herbs, I have a dehydrator. It's an Excalibur. I have the basic model, but it works great. It has 5 shelves, which is plenty for me, and it's in my laundry room. You can see the washing machine door open behind it. If I don't want to use the dehydrator because it is somewhat noisy, I will use the hanging rack that you see in the picture in the garage, and it's just simply zippered compartments. And I was actually drying oregano in it in this picture. And then in the bottom left-hand picture, I had dried some onion chives and I ground them I have a dedicated, it's really a coffee grinder, but it's only ever been used for herbs because I don't want to mix flavors. And so I was grinding some down and getting ready to store it in a jar. I will remind you that dried herbs have at least twice the potency of fresh herbs. So if you were to use, let's say, a teaspoon of fresh herbs, you would only use half a teaspoon of dried herbs. One of the ways I use the herbs that I dry, this is a recipe from Mountain Rose Herbs, and I have them in my on my resource page that you'll see in a minute. But it's a great apple cider vinegar vinaigrette dressing, and it uses, as you can see, rosemary, oregano, chives, parsley, and basil, along with apple cider vinegar, salt, pepper, Dijon mustard, and olive oil. And we really like it. I wish I liked canning. I hate how warm the kitchen gets when you can, and pressure cook your produce. So I've really enjoyed the last 2 years fermenting food. And in my ferments, I've always got some herb, at least garlic. And if I can, I will stick in chives or thyme or whatever else. And fermenting, is the process of preserving food with a salt brine that totally covers it. You use glass weights to hold down all the ingredients in the jar so that no bacteria will grow. And you've got a tight lid on it, and you leave it out. There's every recipe will give you different amounts of time. Most of the things that I ferment, like the Swiss chard at the top, it's Swiss chard, chives, garlic, and brine. I actually have cabbage leaves on top. That fermented for 10 days. And you refrigerate it as soon as you open it and make sure that it's good. And it has a wonderful, that makes a great little side salad. It's kind of a pickly green salad. Like I mentioned, I make teas. What my favorite, I make lemon balm tea and peppermint tea, but my very favorite is peppermint lemon balm tea. And I like to drink that at night before bedtime. Or if I have my stomach feels a little bit upset, that just makes me feel better. I don't know that it makes me sleepy, or I don't know that it cures what ails me, but it's probably somewhat nostalgic because again, my grandmother who said peppermint will take care of you. You can make household cleaners with herbs. There are many recipes online for different vinegar concentrates for general cleaning. This particular cleaner is rosemary and oranges and just solid vinegar that you let sit up in a cabinet for 4 weeks. And you'll notice I had parchment paper because I was using a metal top. I've since moved to mostly plastic tops, or the ones that have a silicone insert, so that because it will rust with the vinegar. And then with this one, you just decant a small amount of the concentrate into a spray bottle with filtered water, and I use it for cleaning countertops. Smells good. Early in the season, my first bouquets always contain more herbs than flowers, just because I don't have a lot necessarily blooming. This was late last winter, early spring, daffodils, red clover, yarrow was blooming. My sugar snap peas were blooming. And then you'll probably be able to pick out some parsley in there. And there were, I know I had some chives in there, and I can't remember what else, but it was just a fun little, hey, spring is here, or spring is on the way kind of bouquet. Medicinal use, again, we don't advocate. I just like people to know what I'm doing in my own home with my own family. And I infused herbs in an oil and let it infuse for 4 weeks, strained it, and then used that oil with beeswax and vitamin E oil, a few other additions to make a salve that I use that we put on cuts and things here at home. So early on, we said that herbs have been used for thousands of years, and one of the first recorded herbals was created by a Greek physician who was actually in Nero's army, Dioscorides, who's a Greek physician, and he traveled with the army into all throughout Greece, Italy, Spain, and North Africa. So at the end of his life, he, around 70 AD, sat down and created a 5-volume encyclopedia. And in that encyclopedia, he listed 600 plants and their uses. He also had animals, I think 130 animals, and what to do with them in that too. And I have read that he talked to healers or physicians in all of these places where he traveled, and kind of collaborated with them on, I guess, trying to heal the soldiers. And what I find fascinating, though, is some of the things that he said in 70 AD are things that we today still practice or use or have seen in practice. For example, I've mentioned mint, soothing for digestive issues is what he had recorded. Honey, antiseptic uses, and for sore throats. And I know many of us have probably had hot tea with honey in it when we've had a sore throat. My husband has worked with beekeepers for many years, and they've always told him Cuts and stings, put some honey on it. There's some antiseptic properties. Garlic is said to have antiseptic uses. Aloe vera, I'm sure a lot of you have who have had aloe vera in the home or outside have put it on a burn, a sunburn, or a burn. And then willow bark is where we get salicin or salicylic acid, which is in aspirin. So these plants have been used in many different fashions for a long, long time. The picture on the right is a cover of Dioscorides' Materia de Medica, the material of medicine. And this is actually, it's not obviously the original. So he created this volume, this encyclopedia in 70 AD, and until well into the 1500s, what he created was still being used by physicians throughout Europe and Africa, anywhere that physicians took his writings, and they also added to it. So this particular document was amended over and over and over. And in the 1670s, an Englishman actually translated it into English for the first time. So the Library of Congress has several copies of this document in various formats. And you'll notice it says 1958 on it. That was the year they received apparently this copy. And you can go to the Library of Congress and actually see different varieties of or different editions of this document that was created over time, which I just find it all very interesting. I'm always trying to get rid of turf in my yard. So last year I created a new dedicated herb bed and it was a lot of fun. It's flat out in full sun. My backyard faces west. So you know it was warm last summer and this was a bed I hand water. It did phenomenal. And all of the perennial herbs survived, even thyme. And I have replanted it now with some annuals. I've added basil and dill and different things to it this year. And then it's just some different views. The pots all around the picture at the top were just herbs that I had overwintered in grow bags or pots that I knew I was going to plant in that bed. And you can see I did what's basically called an instant lasagna bed, and that I put down lots and lots of cardboard, put mulch down, and filled the bed with cardboard and then soil. So it has done well, but it doesn't get special treatment. Herbs are good for companion planting. I mentioned that. They're just really good neighbors, and you'll see some examples in the pictures. Top left is a pot that was planted with a micro tomato, and you'll see the blooms on it. And then I added a pepper plant in there and some, I believe I've got cilantro and a marigold. And then the planter on the right, sweet alyssum, which by the way is an herb, and the flowers are edible. That was new learning for me recently. And it's, of course, it smells great and brings in pollinators. And then there's lavender and lemongrass. And the bottom, last year, I planted hanging baskets with micro tomatoes and basil and chives. And then I put a little marigolds in when they were available. And there's a lot of scientific data now that just kind of supports what like I said, our grandmothers told us, put marigolds with your tomatoes. And a great book is Plant Partners by Jessica Walliser. I mentioned that herbs grow well from seed, just about all of them for me. I grow them in a grow station in my garage. It is insulated. And when it was 10 degrees outside, it was 42 in the garage, but all my babies are on heat mats when they're growing and have adjustable lights. So they're happy. But be patient because some can take up to 3 weeks to sprout. Start them early and bump them up when they develop their true leaves, and then transplant them out when it warms up, when the soil temperature warms up. All right, so I have read so much on herbs. There's no way I could list everything I've ever read, but these 4 books are my favorite at the moment. The Complete Herb Book, the book I read in the 90s. I still have it. It's a very dog-eared paperback book, but I saw it on Amazon recently. Herbs is a great one with great pictures. The herb book has a lot of history and the uses of herbs throughout time. And the last one, Trees, Leaves, Flowers, and Seeds, is actually a children's book. It's for older children, but it's phenomenal. I mentioned Mountain Rose Herbs, Old World Garden Farms. They have a lot of just good information. Mountain Rose Herbs, you can sign up for their newsletter and get recipes every week on all kinds of things, and you can buy herbs from them too. And then there's the reference for the Library of Congress. And so these are my favorite seed sources. They have a tremendous variety of seeds, and they have organic seeds, heirloom seeds, and all have a good turnaround. Seed Savers Exchange is fascinating because they are a seed vault. They are banking seeds for the future, and they have many, many, many members who exchange seeds and turn in seeds to them, and then they test them. So I'm participating in a seed trial for them this year on both zinnias and marigolds. And by the way, zinnias are also an herb because the petals are edible, great in salads, and you know they're great for pollinators. So with that said, I will stop.
We have a number of questions in the Q&A box, if you don't mind, Cheryl. The first one's from a Tracy Brown, who wants to know, how do you deal or how do you work with saffron?
Okay, sorry. So last fall was the first time I planted autumn crocus. I've always planted the crocus that blooms, late winter. But in order to have saffron, you've got to plant the autumn crocus. And you plant it in, I believe it was September. And I only had one bloom because, again, this was my first year to grow it. And so I got one little tiny scraping of saffron, not much. But what I'm excited about, they all overwintered beautifully. They're dying down now, but everything I've read said they will definitely come back. And I'm excited about getting an actual true harvest of saffron this fall.
Okay. All righty. Tracy has a few comments everybody can read in the Q&A box about comfrey being a nitrogen fixer, how she plants comfrey as a cover crop, and puts garlic around her roses, and it helps repel aphids, those kind of things. But Gail P. had another good question for us. She's asking about my French lavender has never bloomed. Do you have any suggestions for her?
Oh, well, so when I buy it small and it's not blooming. I do feed it with some fish emulsion. Once it's been, it comes in the 4-inch pots, and I put it in bigger pots with other things. And I give it about 2 weeks, and then I feed it once with fish emulsion. And that is honestly all I do. So that's the only advice I've got. And like I said, mine gets morning sun, full morning sun until about 11 in the morning, which even by 11 it gets hot here in the summertime. And honestly, that's it. Because I found it to be so easy to grow.
Okay, good answer there. And Karen Roberts wants to know, do you grow your comfrey from seed or root cuttings? And do you consider it a perennial? And does it reseed itself? And how thirsty does yours get?
Ah, I grew it from seed. So the comfrey that I have growing now, I planted from seed in 2019, and it is perennial. It dies to the ground to where you don't even know it's there. That's why I have a sign in front of it. It has not, it's very thirsty, by the way. I water it daily in the summertime. So that was a good question. Uh, It does, it spreads, but it hasn't gotten, I want to say it went from about, 8 inches to about 2 feet, the width of it last summer.
Okay. And there are a lot of comments about how some plant sunflowers, downwind of the property because it attracts aphids, those kinds of things. So they put sunflowers with their corn rows between them, kind of works. And one comment about Tracy plants pizza time.
Oh, I don't know it.
I've never heard of that one.
Mm-mm, mm-mm. Good
Yeah,
to know.
yeah. And Laura has a question about, she'd like to know more about the bag you use for drying your herbs.
Oh, y'all will love this. It was on Temu, Temu, the
Yeah.
yeah, the Temu app. If you If you search for herb drying bags or herb dehydrators, that's how I found it, and it was cheap.
That's a good way to get it. I don't think
Yeah.
mine was that cheap when I bought it. Okay. Is it too late in the year, Rashis wants to know, to start growing herbs from seeds?
Not necessarily. So again, remember I talked about succession planning with things like dill and cilantro. You definitely could keep going with it. And I honestly got a late start. I was so busy helping other people's gardens and places where I volunteer that I was about 3 weeks late getting a lot of my things started, but I'm not worried at all. So some years I'm early, some years I'm on time, and some years I'm just late.
And there are some seeds you can just throw in like mint in the property and it
Oh,
grows
yeah.
whatever time of year it is, you know?
Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
Yeah. And Rashis wants to know when and how to prune English lavender.
So when it blooms, I make a decision. I like to harvest the blooms for potpourri or to bring in just a cluster to dry. And I'll tie it with twine and hang it upside down. So at that point, that's when I do my pruning, when I harvest most of the flowers.
Right. Okay. And you have a comment about excellent presentation, Cheryl. Sandra really learned a lot of it.
Oh, good.
Um, Earlene wants to know, and apologize if I didn't say your name right. What can I plant with lemon balm to keep the pest away from eating it?
I bet. I wonder if the pests are flea beetles. I wonder if they are, or is it grasshoppers? It depends on, I'd almost need to know what kind of bites you're getting in it. Does that make sense? Is something chewing the edges of it, or is something just eating holes in it? I haven't had a real pest problem, which amazed me because the grasshoppers were so bad last year.
Mhm. Yeah. And Washish would like to know what's the variety of saffron you mentioned? He missed it.
Oh, it's just called autumn crocus, Autumn.
Okay.
So it's a very different variety than the one that we're all accustomed to um, seeing those little pretty blooms in the late winter.
And Carmen says, thank you for a wonderful presentation.
You bet.
And our last question that's in our Q&A box is from Anne. Do you use only natural fertilizer, no chemicals?
That's me. So I use worm castings. I use a lot of compost. I will use Fox Farm has several organic liquid concentrates, and they have one called Holy Mackerel, which is the stinkiest fish emulsion you've ever heard of. And then I use my Comfrey compost tea. Uh, I will like when if I plant potatoes, I didn't grow them this year. If I plant potatoes, I use it's an organic granular fertilizer. So I am trying so hard to grow as cleanly, organically as I can. Sometimes with the cost of potting mix these days, it's hard to eat. Well, number one, it's hard to find organic potting mix. And so that's where I fall down in that sometimes I end up buying potting mix that's not organic. But I try to make up for it with everything else being organic. And I'm lucky, I don't have anyone there are 5 yards that butt up to our backyard, and um, none of those neighbors have any kind of gardening going on other than just trees, and they don't spray their yards with anything. So I'm very lucky that way, I know.
That's sort of like out here in the country. There's nobody around spraying anything. Uh,
Right.
yeah, Dick answered a question in the chat box about will CEU credits be offered? And for the Tarrant County Master Gardeners, he commented, yes, just put it under education.
Hmm.
And
Absolutely.
there was a question about calendula being
Hmm.
a perennial or an annual. And
Oh, that's a good one. So it is sold as an annual,
mhm,
but depending upon the winter or how good a shape it's in when it goes into fall. So I haven't seen it self-seed this
mhm.
spring so far. But last year it sprang up all over the garden in places. So I think it depends on how cold we get.
Right,
But
right.
I always just, it's one of those that you can just direct sow out in the garden. You don't have to start it from, indoors in a little pot because it will
And,
come up.
and the last comment that we answered already was about will we share the slides and recording? And Dick put it over in the chat box, and then I would put it down here that they'll receive an email when it's been edited in about 6 to 10 days with a link to YouTube so they can
Absolutely.
replay it. Mhm. Okay.
All right. Well,
Mhm.
thank you guys.
Mhm. Oh, there's a couple more.
Okay.
One more that just popped in. Sandy
Okay.
wants to know what herbs will take more shade.
Mm, had to take a drink.
Yeah.
Cilantro, dill, basil can take some shade, even though it loves the sun. Chives can take some shade. I'm going through my yard right now in my head. Um, Comfrey, actually, my comfrey seems to like getting partial shade. And I love that someone earlier made comments about it. What I meant to say also is a lot of people who are into something called permaculture put
Mhm.
comfrey in amongst their in their orchards. Again, like she said, nitrogen fixer, just that deep taproot going down and amending the soil structure. So, but it likes shade. That's what else? Oh, sweet alyssum in the heat of summer prefers a little bit of shade if it can get it. And again, remember those flowers are edible. Um,
Okay. Yeah. And there's a couple of comments or questions that are very similar about grasshoppers. How do you keep them away from your garden and your herbs? Suggestions.
I don't, I, there's supposed to be, there's a product that the whole world sells out of. Is it called Nolo? Uh, Bait or something for grasshoppers. I've never purchased it. I don't know if it's organic or not, but I always hear people moaning that it's been sold out everywhere and I can't find it. The
Yeah.
grasshoppers, I'll tell you what, I learned recently that Rose of Sharon or Althea is
Mhm.
considered an herb because believe it or not, the flowers and the leaves are edible. Didn't know that. And the leaves are only edible when they're tiny. Apparently you can put them in salads or stir fry them. Haven't tried them. I'm going to try one of the flower petals this year just to see. But anyway, the grasshoppers devour. They
Mhm.
totally strip my Rose of Sharons. I've never had that happen anywhere
Oh,
but Fort Worth.
yeah.
But they always spring back by the end of the fall, by the end of summer, and
Mhm.
I get a flush of new growth and rebloom. So I've just kind of decided to live with the grasshoppers on the Rose of Sharon instead of in my garden. I guess it's like my Rose of Sharons have become a trap crop for grasshoppers.
Okay. And one last question just popped in the box here. Something's eating my pepper plants, leaves and stems. She
Mm.
doesn't think it's grasshoppers or worms. Do you have any
Mm-mm.
idea?
I thought if she's planted them out in the garden, it could be
Mhm.
pill bugs or roly-polies at night. I would go out and look at them at night or slugs.
Yeah.
Go out with flashlight and if it's so okay, this has nothing to do with herbs, but this is how I protect. I take a yogurt container, right? An empty yogurt container. I slit it down the side and cut out the bottom so it makes what I call a collar and I overlap that cut edge and I sink it into the ground. I actually put it in the ground before I plant my plants down in them because I have so much organic matter in my soil, my raised beds that roly-polies think that everything out there is for them. And somehow, if I sink it down a couple of inches underground, they tend not to devour my plants. If I were to go out and plant anything without a collar early in the season, I go out in the morning and they're not only chewed on, mine are eaten down to there's just a stem left. So I hope maybe that might help someone. But you could spray it with insecticidal soap. Now that is something I use too. I make my own with Dawn dish soap and you can look up a recipe online. It's Dawn dish soap, a few drops and just water. You shake it up real well and go out and spray your plant. And it won't burn it or hurt it or anything, but if we get a rain or you water heavily, you might need to spray it again. But that helps. And you can buy commercial insecticidal soap and it's very basic stuff.
Sounds good. That's all for the Q&A.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Cheryl.
You are
Great
so welcome.
presentation.